Hey, everybody. It's good to see you here today. If you got a Bible, get to the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John. We launched a new series last week based on the Gospel of John. And here's what we read starting in John 5, verse 1. John writes this. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm still trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who's this fellow who told you to pick up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. All right, so a question for us right out the gate here. Why doesn't Jesus heal everybody by this pool? Like this site next to this pool contained a large group of people, we're told, that were suffering. There were people who had been blind their whole lives. They wanted to see. There were people whose bodies didn't work. They couldn't walk. They couldn't get around. John tells us there's all this suffering, but Jesus only heals one person. Why just this man? Well, it's not because Jesus doesn't know about the suffering. He's right there. He's standing there watching it all. And it's not because of a lack of compassion on Jesus' part. Like John makes it clear throughout his entire gospel, he's never known a heart as loving as Jesus' heart. Well, some folks might say, "Well, Dave, maybe it's because this is the only man who really has enough faith to get healed." Now, this is a common enough idea in our day. You see it promoted by enough people, that's for sure. That if you believe enough, if you claim boldly enough, maybe, if you have enough faith, well, then you can be healed. You can expect a miracle. And the corollary is if individuals, or I don't know, maybe a whole group, maybe a specific church is not experiencing dramatic healing, then it's because they lack the faith, or they're not dialed in enough to the Spirit of God, or they haven't devoted themselves adequately enough to developing healing ministries and the like. So some will claim that that's what's going on here in this chapter in the Gospel of John, that this is a story to show that miracles only go to those whose faith is strong enough to ask for them. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. Like, take a look a little closer here in chapter 5. We got to notice, first off, in verse 6, that we're told that Jesus approaches this man. This guy's at the pool every day, and he would have made his living there as a beggar. And usually in stories of healing, the person who wants to be healed cries out to Jesus or comes to Jesus, but not here. Jesus initiates this interaction. And then notice the question that Jesus asked in verse 6, "Do you want to get well?" Well, my goodness, what kind of a question is that? I mean, that seems like a stupid question, doesn't it? How many of you have ever asked a stupid question before? Ken Davis tells about a time where he was on a plane sitting on a newspaper. He was sitting on a paper, and somebody next to him asked, "Are you reading that newspaper?" So Davis thought for a second, and then he said, "Yes." And then he stood up, he turned the page and he sat right back down. We all ask dumb questions, you know. I vividly remember when I was in the 4th grade, I was in Mrs. Overbay's class. And because my last name is Robinson, my desk was much closer to the back of the room than it was closer to the front of the class, which is where Mrs. Overbay's desk was. And on this one occasion, Mrs. Overbay was at the board writing something, whatever it was, I don't know, spelling words, arithmetic, the airspeed, velocity of an unladen swallow. I don't remember exactly. But while she was there at the board, someone peeked into our classroom through the window that was on the door. We had just this little pane window that was there, and they just looked into the glass. And for some reason, I decided to ask a question. And it was a stupid question. It didn't seem like it at the time, but I blurted out for the entire class to hear, "Who is that ugly man at the door?" And the class just burst into laughter. And when they did that, I thought, sweet, I just nailed that moment. I stepped into it. That was a good moment. Got the whole class, laughing. This is a good day. I love school. Well, Mrs. Overbay, she didn't say a word. She just walked over to the door. She looked out through that little window, and then she opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and had a discussion with whoever it was that had peeked into our classroom. And while she's in the hallway, I'm feeling pretty good about how everything's gone so far. I provided some comic relief for our class, and laughter is very, very important. After all, it releases endorphins, merry heart doeth good like a medicine, that sort of thing. From my vantage point, I was thinking I was helping to promote a culture of learning in our classroom. So in a way, I was sort of helping Mrs. Overbay out. Well, when Mrs. Overbay came back into the classroom, she didn't seem to share my evaluation of the earlier moment, because it turns out the answer to my question that had elicited such roaring laughter, who is that ugly man at the door, was that it was Mrs. Overbay's husband. So when she came back into the room, she looked directly at me and she said, "David, get all your things together and come up here." And she proceeded to have me sit at a special desk that was literally attached to the front of her desk, which is where I sat for the rest of the 4th grade year. You would not believe how close I was to Mrs. Overbay in the 4th grade. I still feel a little regretful about asking that stupid, almost insulting question that day at Avoca Elementary School. So much so that at my mother's funeral 5 years ago, when we went to where my mom was being placed in a mausoleum, and when me and my dad and my brothers were standing there, I happened to notice just a few spots over from where we were putting my mom to rest, I just happened to notice Mrs. Overbay's name along with her husband's. And so I walked over right in front of their spaces there, and I got as close as I could to it. My nose was almost touching, and I once again apologized for my outburst from 1979 to both her and her husband. It was a stupid question. We all ask dumb questions, don't we? It's sort of an occupational hazard of human beings. But Jesus is posing a question here, and it's got to make you scratch your head. I mean, the answer to the question seems obvious, doesn't it? Why would you ask a man who's been an invalid for 38 years, do you want to get well? Who wouldn't want to get well, right? And isn't that the point of him laying by the pool day after day? Well, notice the guy's response in verse 7. He says, "Sir, I got nobody to help me into the pool when the water's stirred. While I'm trying to get in, somebody else goes down ahead of me." Now, some of your Bibles might actually have a little footnote for all this. It'll talk about there being a kind of a spring where the water's being stirred up. And there was this sort of spring or artisan well at that pool. And when it was bubbling, there was an old tradition or superstition that an angel had come down and had stirred the waters, and whoever it was that made it into the water first, because the angel had stirred the water, well, they would be healed. Now, understand, that's not a part of the Bible, but it's sort of a legend that people have believed. And that's why the scribe added it to a manuscript long after the Gospel of John was written. That's why it's in there as a footnote to help us, to explain to us, if it's in there at all. But you understand, people can sometimes have a tendency to want to make healing a mechanism or technique that they can manipulate or control. And it may be that was what was going on with this guy. At any rate, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" And the man doesn't actually answer Jesus' question. Did you notice that? He doesn't say, "Yes." He just gives all the reasons why he can't make it into the pool first. And John is letting us know that this guy's excuses are not exactly Phi Beta Kappa material, you know, because it's been going on for 38 years. Like in 38 years, you figure he may have done something about this. Maybe he'd gotten a little group of his friends together to get him down into the water. Or he may have saved up enough money to pay somebody to get him down to the water. Or he could have relentlessly just, persuaded people around him until somebody gave in to his persistence. He might have actually laid himself right next to the pool so that when the water was stirred, he'd be right there. He'd be the first one in. But he doesn't try to do any of these things. What's more amazing than his excuses is that the man doesn't even reply to the clear offer Jesus is making to him here. Remember, this is Jesus the healer talking here. His healing abilities electrified the country. People are approaching Jesus from everywhere. They're clutching the hem of his garment. They're breaking through roofs to get to him. See, Jesus doesn't ask the guy, how come you haven't been able to get down into the water first? He asks, do you want to get well? And this man never says, yes, can you help me with that? Please help me with that. I'd love it if you could do something about that. Can you do something about that? He just gives excuses why he can't make it down into the water. It's a fascinating thing to look at the differences in the amount of faith people demonstrate in Jesus in different healing stories throughout the Bible, throughout the New Testament. Like there's a Canaanite woman who has this unshakable faith in Jesus' compassion. And she and Jesus, they sort of spar with one another, and she persists. There's a leper in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, the 1st chapter of the Gospel of Mark, who is much less certain of Jesus' compassion. The leper says to Jesus there in those episodes, if you're willing, you can make me clean. If. The centurion, some of you know about the centurion, also in Matthew 8, he has unprecedented faith in Jesus' power. He says, my servant is at my home across town and he's not doing well. He's sick. And you don't even have to come over there. You don't have to come across town. You could heal him from right here by just saying a word. Incredible faith in him. The father of a tormented son in Mark chapter 9 is much less sure about Jesus' power. He says to Jesus, if you can do anything, could you have some pity on us and help us? And Jesus says, if, everything's possible. The man says, help my unbelief. And Jesus does. Like there's a wide variety of the amount of faith people approach Jesus with. But here in John 5, Jesus doesn't even pursue the conversation with this guy. There are no questions. There's no sparring. He doesn't even ask the man, do you believe? Are you someone of faith? And he doesn't even ask him a second time if he wants to get well. At no time in this episode does Jesus commend the faith of the guy in the 5th chapter of John. And there's no indication that this man had greater faith than anybody else at the pool. There's actually no indication that this man had any faith at all. See, apparently Jesus does not view acts of healing primarily as relief from suffering to be given out to those who have high enough levels of certainty and faith. He performs this act of healing. Catch this, gang. He performs this act of healing to reveal his identity. He heals this guy to authenticate his mission as the long-awaited Messiah. See, Isaiah 35:6 says that one day the Messiah will cause the lame to leap like a deer. That's what's going on here. That's what Jesus is doing. And that's what John is so concerned about in his gospel, all throughout his gospel, the identity of Jesus. So he cuts right to the chase with this guy and he says, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And the guy does. We got to think about this for a moment. Can Jesus heal? Well, yeah, absolutely he can. Can he eliminate people's suffering? Yes, most definitely. But that wasn't his primary concern here. In fact, John later on in the 20th chapter of John, he says, Jesus did many other miraculous signs not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe, and check it, you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, that's his identity, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Like, I think it's accurate to say that Jesus' primary purpose in healing in the Bible, in the New Testament, is not the elimination of suffering. That day will come one day. One day. He is most certainly committed to that. You understand, we will, all of us, be healed. All of us, in every way there is. It's coming for all of us. But that day has not yet come. And his primary purpose in healing was to let people know his identity so that they could trust him and find life in him. Can Jesus heal? Yes. Can we make healing happen by having enough faith? No. It doesn't work that way. You know, my mother struggled with her health in significant ways for the last 10 to 15 years of her life. My mother-in-law, who lives with us, has this terrible disease called polyglucosan adult body disease that has taken, among other things, her ability to walk and use her legs. She's confined to a wheelchair or a bed. She has to have people who take care of her in every way you can think of. And both my mother and my mother-in-law, they are people who have been a part of the church and have such faith their whole life long. I have seen them love God with a humility and a courage and a faith and an uncomplaining spirit that I can only hope I might grow into someday. Teaching people that a lack of healing indicates a lack of faith, well, it just does such massive spiritual damage, and it contradicts the plain teaching of the Bible. It neglects the biblical record of the Apostle Paul, who, despite his prayers, was never delivered from his thorn in the flesh. Never. It neglects the biblical record that suffering, including physical suffering, was the norm, not the exception for Jesus' closest followers. Jesus, make no mistake, is the master of healing. Jesus, make no mistake, invites us to partner with him in prayer, invites us, commands us to talk to him about everything, ask for anything. Can he heal? Yes. He can. He could. He will. But whether he heals in this life or the life to come is not always for us to know. And when healing comes, whenever it comes, it always comes as a mystery and a gift. And one day, by great fortune, because of no merit of his own, it comes to this man at this pool in Bethesda. Now think about this. I want you to put yourself in the scene. Like, for 38 years, this man's been crippled, living as a beggar without help or hope. In our day, like, we'll make it contemporary. In our day, that would mean since 1987. From 1987 until now, day after day, month after month, year after year. And then in an instant, Jesus comes and heals him. What's the man going to do? Does he bathe Jesus' feet in tears of love like the forgiven woman at Simon's house? Does he run back to Jesus like the leper who was healed and, pour out his gratitude? Does he tell everybody the good news about Jesus like the Samaritan woman at the well? Nope. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't say anything. He just gets up his mat, walks away. And it gets worse. In verse 12, some Jewish leaders, hostile to Jesus, ask him, "Who told you to pick up your mat?" And the guy's response to them in verse 13 essentially says, "I don't know who healed me. Like, I didn't catch his name. He got away too fast." Like, think about this. Like, this man didn't even bother to find out the name of the one who healed him after 38 years of helplessness and hopelessness. And if all that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. You look at verse 14. Once again, in verse 14, it's Jesus taking initiative with this man here, and Jesus has a kind of follow-up session with him, and he makes a real sobering statement. When Jesus found him at the temple, he says to him, "Hey, you're healed. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." Jesus says, stop sinning. And the clear meaning behind this is that this guy's been involved in some sort of ongoing sin since his healing that Jesus is telling him has got to end. Like, what's going on? Well, there's a good chance that he's gone back to his old way of life. It very well could be that the sin that he's involved in is he's trying to deceive people and pretend like he's still lame. He's coming to the very same spot very early in the morning, laying on the same mat next to the same pool, trying to hustle people into supporting him. So when Jesus comes and affirms his wellness, see, you are well again, he says. He's blowing the guy's cover. You can kind of picture the guy saying, hey, use your inside voice, Jesus. He didn't want to go back to work. He didn't want to learn a trade. He didn't want to have to expend the effort. He clings to his old way of life, his old brokenness. Why? I mean, maybe because it's easier. Maybe because he's afraid to try anything else. Maybe because old habits die hard. Maybe because his broken legs weren't the only thing that was broken about him. Like, you understand, this whole episode is not just about a physical healing. Jesus uses a quite rare word when he says, do you want to get well? It could be translated whole. Do you want to be whole? Or it could be translated sound. Do you want to be sound? Do you want to be whole? Do you want to be well? Do you want to leave this way of life? Jesus asks. He says there'll be some changes. You get that, right? You won't be seen as a victim anymore. You'll have to embrace new challenges, new responsibilities, take new steps. Do you want this, really? See, there's this kind of cost to wholeness. Jesus' offer to heal was not and is not a promise to a problem-free, suffering-free life. Stop sinning. Make some changes. Now, this is sort of the climactic moment of this story. This is the hinge on which everything turns, even more than the physical healing. This is the guy's moment. And Jesus watches. Like, will the man get it? What's the guy going to do? Will he fall to his knees? Will he repent of his sin? Will he receive healing for his soul? No. He turns and walks away. And in verse 15, he goes to Jesus' enemies. And he says, I found out his name, guys. You want to know his name? I'll tell you, the man you're hunting for, his name's Jesus. And in the Gospel of John, this is the beginning of the persecution of Jesus. And they begin to try to kill him, and they won't stop until they succeed. And it begins with this man who Jesus healed. Jesus would pay for this with his life. Do you want to get well? You know, the whole next section, really the rest of the chapter, you may think it's about something different. Like, okay, we've got the healing that's gone on, and now we'll move on to something else. But actually, the central focus of John's gospel comes right to the forefront again, which is the identity of Jesus. John's main concern that he's trying to answer throughout this book is, who is Jesus? And John wants us to know. Because right after this healing, once again, Jesus claims to be God. He says, me and the Father, we're on the same page. I am from the Father. I'm the Son of the Father. And I'll strike this note again, CCC. Nobody who holds to a position that Jesus was simply and only a good guy who did some good things, maybe had some good teachings at one point in time. Nobody who holds to that is paying attention at all to what Jesus says about himself. Jesus claimed to be God on practically every other page. Don't settle, CCC, for a casual cultural understanding of who Jesus is. Do the work. Dive in. Find out. Don't be like this guy here by the pool who says, when he was asked, who was the guy who healed you? And he says, yeah, I don't really know. I don't know the first thing about him. Don't even know his name. This whole section after this interaction at the pool of Bethesda is actually a continuation of what happened at that pool. Because Jesus healed the guy on the Sabbath. He tells the guy to pick up his mat, which would have been considered work, which was forbidden by Jewish law on the Sabbath. And so the religious leaders, they see this guy carrying this mat, and because they have this rigid, legalistic understanding and expression of faith and their understanding of God, they go right up to the guy and they say, what are you doing? You're carrying your mat? You can't carry your mat. It's Sabbath. You're not allowed to carry your mat on the Sabbath. Who told you to carry your mat on the Sabbath? And he's like, I don't know. I'm healed. I mean, that's a big deal. But they don't care. They don't care about the healing. See, they don't see this guy as a walking miracle. They see this guy as a walking violation. And that, coupled with what Jesus actually says throughout this next section, raises the tension. And in just in case we're missing it all, John makes this observation in verse 17 and 18. He says, for this reason they tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And if that weren't plain enough, the rest of the chapter from verse 19 all the way through the end of verse 47, for almost 30 straight verses, we get essentially a monologue by Jesus stating over and over and over again that he is God, that he was sent from God, that he and God are the same. Goodness, in verse 30, he even says, the entire Bible points to him. It's about him, he says. These scriptures are about me. He's talking to the religious leaders that knew the scriptures like the back of their hand. And he says, everything you've been reading, you got your head down looking for something. I'm it. I'm the one it's pointing to. See, it's right in front of us, plain as day. It's right in front of them, plain as day. It's right in front of us, plain as day. What are we going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? I want to say again, you got to settle the score of who Jesus is and who he will be in your life. He claims to be no less than God in the flesh. And John is striking that over and over and over again, chapter after chapter of his gospel. What's your conclusion? Because if he is, it changes everything. Everything. This guy had an encounter with God in the flesh. And for goodness sake, it wasn't even that he met him. He was healed by him. And he just went about living the same old life. Didn't change him a bit. Didn't redirect him at all. Didn't alter the trajectory of his life one bit, not in the least. How about you? It's possible to be around Jesus. It's possible to be here. It's possible even to have a moment with Jesus, but then to fall right back into the same old life and the same old patterns. And Jesus doesn't make a bit of difference in your day-to-day, week-to-week existence at all. And that's as much a tragedy as this guy getting the ability to walk and choosing to act like an invalid. Who's ready for a new life? Who's ready for a new direction? Who's ready to fall at Jesus' feet and say, I know who you are. Command me. Lead me. My faith, my hope, my future, it's with you, whether the healing comes or it doesn't. You know, just like Jesus paid for this healing with this man, with his life, he pays for our healing too with his life. He heals us the way he heals us. He went to a cross, paid the ultimate price. He died a horrible death. He suffered. His body was given up for us on the cross. His blood spilled for us, and we commemorate that every single time we come together. We are reminded again of the price that Jesus paid so that we could be healed. We're going to celebrate communion right now. If you didn't get one of those individually wrapped packets of bread and juice, they're in the back. You can grab those off the table. Let's take a few moments. Let's look to God and let's thank God. Let's drive a stake in the ground today and say, I'm with you. From here on out, you're everything to me.
Sunday. See you next week.